Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. For real, welcome back, though, to the rereading of ReWonderland, The Mask and the Maiden, written by A.S. Hunt and read by yours truly, Freewata. We are back here today, and we've actually covered this book before. Some people from our previous show may not have actually had the chance to listen to it, and this will be the full retelling of this story. And even before, in the same vein, we read this in like little parts between because I just didn't have the ability to read all of it at once yet. And I'm going to try as a challenge to myself to do all of this, each chapter all in one go, not splitting up into parts and making sure that each chapter is fully represented, even if I'm dying by the end of it. A little bit behind the author themselves, Ash or A.S. Hunt goes by Amalgam Ash or Ash Quest. I'll leave links to his channel. On some of the YouTube side that he does, he works on like tabletop dungeon crawlers, game books, news, unboxings, and more. He also works on providing like let's plays, tutorials, FAQs, documentations, and different facets of building your fantasy worlds. I've seen a lot of him working through the Bakin project and also hosting his own game jams, which have been really fun to watch in the past. So if you enjoy any of that kind of content, feel free to reach out, send a subscription, let him know that you've listened to his book, and you better tell him how good it is because it's a damn good book. You know. Also, much credit to the lovely Shar for creating some of the awesome artwork that I see on here that you see on front of the thumbnail, also made by one person, which is a feat in and of itself because my stick figures are about as good as they get. Well, y'all, let's dive right on in to the reworked, the rekindled, the flame that is ReWonderland. Chapter 1, Descend, or The Deathblow Robin. It is said, popularly, by denizens of the province of our ReWonderland dominant flower Myosotis selvatica, that the mines outside and below the castle of the mad were caused by an angel's fall, that the vertex of the pit itself, which proved indeed to spread outwardly and in a spiral as it ascended, was the result of a fall of a being so great, or at least heavy, or perhaps light, thrown with the greatest of velocities, that the lands were rearranged at the point of contact and became a web like network of canyons. The residual force also caused many gorges about the lands as well, damaging nature's design of mountain and Hom's design of society. This canyon was nevertheless worked upon to produce some relevant quantity of metals, rare or not, that would aid the so called mad in his conquest of the adjacent lands, or at least supplement his unquestionable desire to standardize the format of anything usable, productive or not, by casting it of said metals. To agree or disagree would be to diminish the objective nature of my documentation, but I will offer that one of the many myths of the cursed kingdom of Mamerg, one hard of hearing, says that our land is unholy, and that the land itself opened its maw to swallow up parts of the whole. The mouth of the world, you see, isn't shaped like our mouths. I've a diagram to catalog just this, which I will share when it's finished. I will also say that this particular view isn't endorsed openly, otherwise, why would the land still exist? We Homs would destroy it without prejudice if we even hinted at its own sentience. Journal of the Bellman, upon his entry into Lacey Vale, third destination, 40th of Hargreave and 180th grand cycle. Don't you worry about a name, you silly child, said the arcanine thing with a feminine quality, spinning her in this way and that. You've at least 4 things to worry about before that. And they begin with what, where, why, and what again. The girl, not so much a child, had found herself quite naked, in the middle of what she really hoped wasn't a giant funnel web, spun somewhat in the middle of a vertical tunnel, apparently to catch unwary falling prey, or, the girl supposed, prey stupid enough to fall downwards. There she had just enough time to realize her situation, which really couldn't get any worse. Except she remembered that she couldn't remember anything. There was dim light coming from various holes in the tunnel, which made her think she might have been in the trunk of a tree, and she used this to search as best as she could, stuck in the thick adhesive. She did discover the sharpness of her nails, and hoped to somehow gain precious freedom with them, without clumsily reaffixing herself more awkwardly to the web. She was even more hopeful that she could get this done again before what she had hoped wasn't a giant spider descended to meet and begin seasoning her. Her hopes were, of course, dashed on every account, and she faced the giant creature nearly upside down, more stuck than ever.
"At any rate,"
purred the creature,
"the Mad will give you a most befitting name."
the girl did not feel comfortable enough to ask who or what the Mad was.
"Then, dear spider, pray tell, who am I?"
5 of the 7 eyes situated on the creature's cranium squinted at her.
"Pray."
"Pray?" the girl exclaimed.
"Then to whom or what?"
She put her hands together, bottom lip quivering. Much as conversation aimed to distract, one could yet cut the horror in the air with so much as a wooden ladle. The arcanine creature made a revolting sound. Arachnine creature, my bad. Creature made a revolting sound like it was going to be sick, thought the girl, and she realized it was laughing. At her, of course. Pale skinned, blackened hair, emaciated body.
"Perhaps a little on the short side. What do I know? You bipedals see beauty in the strangest places."
The girl could feel the creature's warmth as it crept closer.
"What are you, then?"
"You are what you eat," began the creature, its speech littered with abhorrent mirth.
"And you are what you put into yourself. To me and the Mad and all of his familiars, you are prey. I suppose with that logic, in a roundabout way, we are all each other. But before you are anything else to anyone, you must be arranged properly."
Arrange was an ambiguous term, and terror was felt around as a spattering of saliva fell from the creature's mouth onto the girl's face. The spider gave no warning before it wrestled the girl free from the web, and with 2 of its legs suspended her in the air while 4 of the others dove into its own spinnerets to pull out copious amounts of the silky mixture that had created the hammock prison in which the girl found herself. It turned her upside down for just a moment, and then returned her orientation. She had time to see other shapes wrapped in the webbing around her. She was certain they were food, and was glad that she could not see what manner of creature this thing feasted upon. But now, the beast with the feminine voice drew her close with 2 of its appendages, higher than where the girl thought its head ought to be, and she saw that the upper body of a gigantic woman sat on the thorax, complete with head and arms, sickly pallor, and nude save for long, wicked black hair that covered its face and breasts.
"You are a female. That much is certain,"
confirmed the hellish thing, and laughed wretchedly again. The girl reddened, but fear still outweighed embarrassment. She stifled a shriek as the creature began throwing the silk over her body and smearing it across her chest, waist, and arms. She realized, where there should have been small claws on the end of its legs, there were instead hands, quite like her own, except somehow reversed and discolored. And the creature was making her clothing for her from the silk. If the girl could conjure any memory of unpleasantness, she was sure it couldn't compare to a gargantuan arachnid with woman-like hands feeling her up and dressing her in a food preservation. And now she was beginning to feel quite embarrassed after all.
"A delightful bow on the back, and you're fit to serve,"
said the thing. It had created a form-fitting dress directly onto her slender body, complete with the baffling bow.
Almost a pretty thing. I would almost love to lend you an egg sack, but I can't see that they would live long in that land.
This made no sense to the girl, who felt the need to fidget, and then she tugged nervously at her skirt, deciding it was just a bit too short.
Won't you spare me, then?
She said pitifully. The great horror laughed again, and the laughter echoed through the tunnel and caused tones from the taut lines that joined to the web.
It doesn't matter which way you go now. They're both mad.
And with that, it released its grip on her, allowing her to free fall, upwards, much to her surprise. As for the fall, the girl was catapulted upward, but the sensation turned sickeningly into one of the downward plummets. Although she was very sure of her orientation when she exited the lair of the arachnid horror, the tunnel became narrower and narrower, and she was very near colliding and bouncing off the wall, probably fatally at the present velocity. A light came into view which she was now falling into and had to shield her eyes to the enveloping brightness, which showed that she had dropped out of a mid-air cave of sorts and was heading into a gray rolling valley of clouds. She became wet and cold, falling through, and droplets of water stayed beaded on their dress after. She then saw the mainland, a vast expanse of beautiful green vegetation and hills. She had forgotten entirely about her fright, and was now taking in the wonder of the landscape that she was falling towards, somehow feeling as though she was slowing. To one direction, in her present state, her left, she discovered luminous hills that sparkled in the bit of sunlight coming through the clouds, and she wondered if they might harbor some kind of crystal. Huge trees were near these hills, with sparkling bulbs hanging from each, their glint visible in the light of day. In the opposite direction she saw a winding road through a path that led into gnarled trees and odd-colored swampland. But sadly, she had noticed too late in her descent to see what was over the wall that the road ended at. Just below her destination, she saw a large black blot surrounded by black walls and an odd ring-shaped expanse of forest, and beside it a maze of greenery. A pond was within these walls also, and what seemed to be a huge garden. Lastly, the rear of the place overlooked somewhat of a canyon which tunneled underneath the damaged outer bailey and touched one part of the forest. The black blot thusly became a grand black castle as she neared, walls all around, and a tower at each corner of the outer bailey, and all was black in the architecture. She realized that her fall would take her just outside of the largest center building, which she now saw as a grand mansion of frightening design, settled by the hedge maze, garden, canyon, and pond, and the pentagon of walls and towers, themselves surrounded by a small bubbling moat and the evil ring of forestry. The architecture of the keep was at once foreboding, and though walls and a moat were set up in a traditional fashion around the perimeter, the very structure of the keep and the towers were repellent enough, probably, to keep away absolutely anything or anyone, though the blackness of the structures contrasted greatly with the brilliant colors of the gardens and waters. She had noticed a tug at her back, and sensed more slowing in her fall, so now that she was gently floating toward the ground, and with some awkward difficulty she managed to turn to see that the gloppy rope of web attached to the back of her new dress, and realized that it had kept her from free-falling the whole way down. It ended far above her, leading back into that cave, itself suspended somehow in the sky, and it quickly became no longer possible to see. It became thinner and more stretched as she fell slower and slower, until she was very near the ground. At this point, she huddled up, bracing for impact. But the webbing broke just as she came to a stop, and she landed pitifully with a plop after a fall of 3 feet.
At least one can still get on with their day, and perhaps try to figure out who one is,
she said to herself with some annoyance, standing and rubbing her head. But she only had enough time to dust herself off before realizing she was being watched from behind by 2 large dark hounds covered in blankets. The first perked up its ears and stared back at her. The second gave a low growl. The girl noticed the one not growling had an animal in its mouth, moist with saliva and dripping blood from fatal bite wounds.
Good pup,
She said, stifling a gasp and stepping back.
that's quite a good puppy. Mayhap you two beautiful things would love to share that, bunnip thing, and I shall just be on my.
She was cut off as her back bumped into something thin and rigid, and she heard an angry snort above her. She spun to find something of a giant black beast with a decidedly pretty woman on its back, carrying a small hunting bow. Its anchor point was at her cheek, knocked and drawn and trained on the girl. The smaller beasts were both growling now, and the girl saw that they did not carry blankets, but grand wings that unfolded partially to aid in pursuit of anticipated escape. The woman had alternating strands of long black and auburn hair, weaved in some locked or braided fashion. Small pauldrons sat upon her shoulders, and a rust-colored cape hung at her back. She looked noble, but decidedly of a nation too foreign to tell hierarchy from attire, which included black trousers and engraved leather boots, and mail of black scale across her chest. Decidedly. "Do not move, No Name," said the woman in stern, commanding voice. "So commands the Baroness of this castle." No Name was a bit disgruntled at having been given such a disappointing title, but at least the ladies made sense.
I'm very sorry, milady,
She started.
but, well, you see, I can't very well remember my actual name at this moment, but I'm quite sure it isn't No Name.
The Baroness moved her weapon to swing herself off her beast of burden and landed gracefully at its side, still training the arrow on her target. She was every bit as graceful as her self-proclaimed title suggested. "Oh, I'm sure that is. You see, No Name, you've forgotten your name and your past," scripted the woman, eyeing her webbed dress with piqued interest. "You know some things, like perhaps what these creatures are called, and that people may live in castles and mansions or in cottages and huts. But you can't remember your name, or what day it is." She spoke with certainty. "You still have your procedural memory, but that's probably close to nothing. Tell me, girl, what are those hounds behind you called?"
They seem to have hunted a bunnet, ma'am,
said No Name, probably too nervous to curtsy, and she glanced behind her to see that the bunnip had disappeared, and the hounds were watching her, appetites unresolved.
but I've never seen animals of such a type, except perhaps smaller, with less pronounced wings, and I think those are named vesperulves.
"Very good," said the woman. "Now tell me what you had for breakfast." No Name couldn't make up something if she tried. No memory came of food nor first glimpse of sun, beyond falling out of the horrific spider creature's lair. "Thought so," said the Baroness. "You retain some manners at least." The girl thought to curtsy at this, but the woman wasn't finished. "Listen well, No Name," she continued. "As I said, you will do as I command, as Baroness of this castle." She lowered her bow, moving to change it and the arrow out from the sheathed rapier at her side. The two hounds flanked No Name as the Baroness moved toward the girl to study her.
Wait, do you mean that I am the Baroness?
Asked the girl, genuinely confused. The hounds stopped their low growling, perked up their vespertine ears, and began laughing. This wasn't quite as displeasing as the sound the arachnid produced, but was still a little hoarse and more like a croak. The Baroness herself scowled and her rapier drew with a clang. She leveled the end to No Name's nose, who regarded the weapon with the utmost respect, having no desire to be impaled, gorged, or otherwise grievously injured through the nose. The girl glanced about to see if there were any openings that she could escape through, but realized the Baroness was watching her intently, drawing still closer, and she wasn't sure if she could outrun the Vespers.
I apologize for trespassing, she said in a low voice, genuinely afraid now. I am truly quite sorry. You see, I just fell, and suddenly I didn't know where I was.
Much better, the Baroness replied. I'm not going to kill you, slave. At least, not directly. I'm going to bring your pretty carcass to the lord of this castle, and he will decide what to do with you. She grinned, and like all merriment displayed in this land so far, it chilled the girl. And how many times, if he wishes. The Baroness had bound No Name with cord and later across the back of her beast, which the latter had later learned was a painted short rhinophant, and they traversed through the front courtyard of the castle, a place so grand and spectacular that it seemed to the girl there should have been more servants, or more people, or animals, or some form of populace, but she saw no one else from her disadvantaged point on the beast except the two Vespers trailing behind, still eyeing her like some morsel. They walked past the beautiful gardens intertwined with the hedge maze, which seemed limitless now that No Name had landed in the midst of it. Flowering bushes seemed to dance in the wind and flirt with their bland, trimmed counterparts along the walls. The hedge was too tall for the girl to see over, even from the back of the rhinophant. They walked on across the perfectly level landscape, the grass neat and prim. They had passed into the main gates of the glorious Black Palace, and no light seemed to reflect on any of its surfaces. The castle seemed a constant challenge to the sun, denying that it could be conquered by any light, and the girl was a little afraid to pass through the large, ornate front doors and into the abyss behind. The castle proved to be more civil than the outside suggested, however, with beautiful carvings and statues of nameless and sometimes formless creatures and gods abound, illuminated by the daylight from windows high above the ground floor. The girl tried to recognize the carvings, but they were all alien to her. She fancied some of them, for the creatures were unlike any she could remember. Some with snouts and wings, others with long, winding tongues and dozens of eyes. The oddness of the sculptures was contrasted by numerous paintings that populated the walls. They chiefly contained aesthetically pleasing people, some very regal looking, others heroic. The Baroness stopped the rhinophant at length and took the girl off with surprising strength. The girl nearly thought to compliment her on this, but thought it was best to keep from offending her. Walk, slave, commanded the Baroness. The girl was able to move enough to walk haltingly alongside of the woman, and though she was not forced at the end of the rapier, she was still tethered to the Baroness by a kind of lead. She knew an attempt to escape would be useless. Besides, the Vespers were close behind, heads low to the ground. She knew they would be upon her, their appetites still unresolved. The Vespers shook the ground in the slightest with every step they took, and it seemed to the girl that they were made of stone. Having no memory, she could not recall whether she was a fast runner, and so did not chance to think what might happen if she could break free. Her claws, sharp as they might be, were only perhaps a tenth of the size of the Vespers, and the woman's rapier looked only a little less threatening. They came out to a beautiful winding staircase, illuminated by the beams shining in, red carpet trailing up to the walkway above, which stayed along the wall and overlooked the statues below, and started up the steps. The girl thought she had seen someone amongst them out in the corner of her eye more than once. Perhaps a young woman or two dressed in sort of a bright uniform for cleaning, but they disappeared before she could turn to look, and she was prodding along. Are you imaginative, girl? Questioned the Baroness. I'm pitifully sorry that I can't remember, said No Name. The woman did not seem fazed. The mad will make you so. You will fear things you could not have known before. All of this for trespassing? Questioned the girl. She was looking beyond the staircase and noticing dark stains now in the court of statues, in questionable spots on the floor. Only complete fools wander onto this land, said the Baroness without looking at her, or those preferring exile to punishment for crimes. Both deserve what comes. The girl feared to ask further questions, but ears perked as she realized the mad had been mentioned again, and she dared anyway. Who or what is the mad, and why are they called so? Silence! Best to savor these moments before you know him, said the Baroness. and the girl said no more. They came at length to a large and old metal door with intricate carvings of all manner of creature, winged, hooved, tentacled, tailed, and even some with appendages the girl couldn't identify. The Baroness held a hand to the Vespers that had been following to this point, and they lowered meekly to the ground. She gave the door a gentle rap, and then a push, and the ensuing creak sounded throughout the halls. The girl thought her head would implode from the tone. She could hear more Vespers bang like gigantic hounds outside in response, and it came from all directions, below and above, and No Name knew that they were circling outside in flight, perhaps looking for more prey. Inside, a very strange smell wafted, and though the Baroness gave it no heed, it made the girl heave dryly. They entered the room absent. They entered the room absent the hounds, and the girl could see that it might be a laboratory of some sorts, fitted with many unidentifiable chemicals in vials and tubes and trays. Books filled shelves, lining every other wall until they abruptly stopped and gave way to the majestic balcony which overlooked the canyon at the rear of the mansion. Vesper wolves flitting about here and there in the beyond, natural light from the first sun pouring in. Standing in the maybe laboratory were four figures, the tall, dark-cloaked central of which turned to face them. The Baroness undid No Name's bonds quickly, no longer perceiving her as a threat, and pushed her to the ground. She then bowed low. The figure drew near, and No Name could see that it was the figure of a nobleman, or a count, a head taller than the Baroness, and two heads taller than herself. It wore a wide-brimmed hat atop a gruesomely masked head, and a black, heavy-looking cloak covered most of its form. The other three figures No Name could see were not people, but mechanizations of some sort, built to look and move like a person ought. Those were outfitted with gears and cogs of varying shape, and given some decoration, clothing, dare say, to denote where things should be. The smell lingered, but there was an ample breeze from the balcony to clear it out. The ones below refer to me as the Mad, he continued. He did not elaborate further, but took hold of his cape and began to circle her. No Name felt sure that there wasn't ones below to address him at all, and supposed that could be the reason for the name to begin with. "Do you mean the statues?" she asked. "Quiet!" the Baroness seethed. "You may address me as Lord, Master, Liege, or Sir," said the masked creature, "although I do not care for titles, and you shall not have the opportunity to address me in any further way after you've gone to the pits." Undesirable speech aside, the girl thought his voice was surreal, because it seemed to fluctuate between deep and airy, and soft and loud, and grinding and harmonious, and it sounded much like more than one voice, but none spoke too clearly as all of them together. It was almost as though the mask was causing this, but now the idea came into the girl's head that it could be the creature's head, and not a mask at all, though no mouth moved when he spoke. "Lord Liege Master, sir," said one of the automatons with a little squeal, and the Mad backhanded it on the supposed cranium for its insolence. As for the automatons, they looked very much like people from the waist up, but transparent. Their insides consisted at least visibly of nothing more than gears and cogs which whirred in various places and at varying speeds when they moved. There was some crude manner of sculpting done to the material housing the gears, and each had its own distorted face, though whether it used the spinning gears it had for eyes to see, it was impossible to tell. As for the waist down, the things rolled about on a single large wheel, the center of which was affixed to what would have been the knee joints. They did all look slightly different, and the last one that kept squealing had a bit of a problem keeping its head up at all. They all wobbled slightly, as if unable to keep their balance. The Mad very well could have been an automaton like the others, she thought, but she sensed that something more was behind the mask, sentient and organic. Then again, the mask seemed itself as such, exuding an eerie, haunting quality. overall presentable in ways, but just as threatening as everything else so far. Your neck, said the Mad, and the girl felt a tingle at his presence behind her. It bears a symbol, or a glyph. My lord, exclaimed the Baroness, no longer bowing, please, allow me. The Baroness approached the girl. She stood easily a head taller, and although the girl sensed her complete fealty to the Mad, she could imagine her peering down her nose even at giants. The Baroness walked around the girl, and there was silence. Gertrude, my lord, said the Baroness. What an awful word, thought the girl. I'll prefer no name. Ah, exclaimed the Baroness, this filthy hair is in the way. She brushed it aside, to the girl's embarrassment, revealing another character on her back. Ashley, she said pointedly. The 9 strokes here arranged to form that sound. Being on our side, Ashley with its ASHLII. What language is it? Said the girl, though she then realized she may not have understood any answer, because she couldn't remember anything about languages. Silence! Commanded the Baroness, and not a thing in the castle made a sound. At that moment, the very water may have stopped running in the streams below. The girl obeyed, standing up straight as she could, but wondered absently if silence was the name of the language rather than a command. The Mad walked to her front again. I do not recognize it, girl, he spat. The tongue is foreign to me. The symbols are nonsensical. It may as well be moon language. His voice was grating. The Baroness watched the Mad, anticipating more queries, but he gave none, and started off with a wave of his hand that commanded 3 of the automatons at his side. He pointed at the girl, without looking at her, and the automatons swirled around her disjointedly, engaging her arms and her neck. They then walked her along with the Baroness following behind, as the Mad led them to the balcony. Magically altered, perhaps to forget your previous existence, memories and the like, said the Mad thoughtfully. Mayhap the word is her name, my liege, said the Baroness. Mayhaps the name is her word, my liege, said one of the automatons. Mayhap her word is the name's me league, said another. Mayhap her name is the liege and lord mine, said the last, but it ended on a little squeal. Speak, girl, said the Mad without turning back. Have you any memory of before you arrived in my gardens? There is none, my lord, said the girl, mimicking the tone of everyone else, and she thought she imagined the Mad tilt his head one way. But she more vividly conjured the Baroness, eyeing her sharply, hand on the hilt of a rapier. Save for my dress, which was given to me by a most You stupid girl, said the Baroness. Do not patronize. You surely can't remember a thing. Somewhat expected, said the Mad, allowing the gears of thought to engage. Again, he did not elaborate. Female, you say, said the Mad darkly. I would have proof. The woman scowled, then gripped the bottom of Ashley's webbed skirt and yanked upwards before she could react. But react she did, with a humiliated gasp and a covering of her face with her hands. When the Mad's voices grunted in approval, the Baroness let go and the dress slowly fell back into place. And is she home or homa? Home, said the woman. I believe she resembles us as home, but she's unnaturally pale, and her hair is as black as a Watkins fur. Blacker. No maid positions are currently open, said the deepest parts of the Mad's voice. I suppose we should record her age. I don't know, said the Baroness dubiously. A girl in appearance and mind, but I'd wager she's bled as a woman. Ashley covered her face again. 14 grand cycles may fetch a price, said the Mad in the strangest tones. But I need more excavators. We need more crystal, more metal. In any case, began the girl.
May I be called by that name? Ashley? It is so much better than no name. And I promise to respond promptly, no matter the context, if I'm called.
The Baroness presently spun the girl toward her and backhanded her face. The girl did not fall from this, but attempted to regain her composure quietly, somehow successfully, fighting back tears. Called upon, corrected the Mad, still subdued by prior concerns to notice with any graver emotion. Such a promise mirrors your current duty, you carrier of idiocy. The girl thought that they needn't have been quite so rude about it all, but conceded that she may have offended. They now continued through the hall, and the Mad spoke. But Ashley is easier to say, and frees the assignment of no name for the next slave, the Mad said thoughtfully, definitely speaking with more than one voice. With this, then, I send you into the mines. Your task now, dear Ashley, though I only say the name out of respect for protocol. Indeed, and I wager that you'll lose entitlement to it when you perish, as do so many others in your role. It is to collect for me precious silver, and with it the promise of wares, of utility, and essence of magical properties, which admittedly were all definitions of the material and its application here in this land. Currency was only afforded to those who acknowledged playing cards and gold. This had been a great deal for the Mad to say, and they now walked just by a grand table situated for dining on the balcony, while taking in the outdoor view. Ashley felt dejected, to say the least, but was glad at having a name assigned, and thought of ways to feel more confident, so that she may face the adversity she somewhat expected within the mines. She scolded herself at having viewed the chalice on the grand table an option, but knew her luxuries, which included options in general, would deplete upon stepping foot into the labor she imagined. And this was enough to drive her to quickly twisting free of the automatons, running to the table and clutching at the chalice, and consuming its contents without another thought. The automatons, immediately scolded by the Mad as they closed in on the girl, bound her in new ways and proceeded to carry her to the assigned drop-off point. And Ashley submitted to them completely surprised at how foul the drink tasted. "Idiot!" shouted the Baroness. "That was his Eminence's finest vagueness. You'll land below to drunkenly perish without any work done."
"I should very much like to know where I am,"
she shouted at everyone, but the Baroness only scowled, and the Mad turned to walk away as though late for something.
"Temporarily only,"
she told the automatons, already feeling the effects.
"I know temp."
"Only temporarily," said the first automaton. "The death blows Robin," said the second bafflingly. "A bit, a wheeze bit, a bit wheeze," said the third, squealing at the end, and beginning to smell burnt.
"Stupidest tea party I'd ever been in all my life,"
said Ashley, getting braver and more than a little annoyed. But there was no reaction from the automatons. Aside from idle repeating of banter, the automatons only knew their place and the functions they had to carry out, whether or not the subjected admitted to the delineation of their role, and they brought her to the balcony of the Mad's looking point, where they carried out their programmed instruction for hiring new miners, which was to physically throw them from the balcony to the pit below without further regard for safety nor longevity. And because the Mad had created them with protocol in mind, and only for that reason, they stood to watch as the hapless girl fell screaming into the abyss below until they could not detect her presence. It was time, then, for them to go back into the keep, where they would await further timed instructions. Ashley drunkenly thought as she fell, when the initial shock of falling had subsided to her fast inebriation.
"I meant to think that my options, which include luxuries in general, will fall once I mine into the deplete."
But this confused her, and she continued on howling when she knew the ground was close.
"Makes sense, I suppose,"
said Ashley, dusting herself off from her now second fall. Her sobriety returned quickly, and her short, drunken stupor had been replaced with a pain in the front of her head. So they throw people into this little gorge, but it's a gorge of fungus. That way you don't fall to your death, Hum, said the fungi, or one of them. That's more than obvious, said Ashley. What on earth is a hump? She felt a little bad for her lack of manners now, but decided they were weakened either by the drink or the succeeding descent from the Mad's balcony. At least this time she could see her origin when she looked above. You're a hump, the shroom answered. All of you are. Dreadful things, but tasty in places. But you're a skinny, pale hum, and not very pleasing to the eye. Maybe cave ones would love your meat, the slims. Outside, no. I guess you're a slave too, then? She asked, offended. Offended by a fungus. No, sir, said the little mushroom. I'm a native, but if I get caught talking to you, I'll be sautéed by that dreadful woman. And if I stick around here much longer, the Bandersnatch will sniff me out and swallow me whole. And before Ashley could ask any more questions, or tell if that she wasn't a sir, the white cap of the shroom lifted up, and the little thing walked off on several translucent legs. It was puzzling to watch, but everything was. Ashley thought she would have been ready to swallow the thing whole herself, for its rudeness and her sudden appetite. Instead, she reflected a bit on her memory problem. I can't remember myself, she said to the remaining rocks and sand, not to be surprised if another inanimate object were to answer. But I feel like I've seen something like this before. She looked to the sky and saw very few clouds now. The first sun now beyond the canyon floor, giving it away to shadow. There was a path of sorts that must have been trod by previous slaves, and she followed it through the small canyon until it gave way to an open expanse of land, completely blocked in on all sides by rock wall, and there were several figures of all shapes and sizes working to hack away at the wall. The workers were chipping away, some with crude hand tools, other with parts of creatures or other people. Ashley, she said to herself, and she did like it very much, you're a hum that will slave away in the mines until... Her stomach rumbled, and it reminded her of the squealing automaton. Until you see the Mad again, or die from starvation. Ashley noticed much more now. Looking about the land in the canyon, a few of the workers were animalistic in appearance, and others looked like her, albeit taller and sturdier built. There were figures collapsed on the ground too, and it looked like some were sleeping peacefully against one of the far walls. She saw many of the mushrooms on the way, and tried to pick at a few to see how each might taste. But each time she nearly got one, it skittered off on legs. There was one large one, purple, and she tried to catch, but it crawled up the wall and squirted a vile juice at her. The juice stained her dress and her skin, and smelled sulfuric. A deterrent, she thought, and knew that it would have tasted awful too. She saw some automatons standing guard, but it was difficult to tell over what. The workers, tired and worn-looking, seemed to be working of their own free will. Then she understood. Seeing a small automaton wheel a tiny minecart along a small track to the center of the field, and it rang a bell attached to itself. The work stopped, and the workers went to the cart raggedly. Trading time, said the automaton in unnatural timbers. Work for food. Work for food. Today's rate is one morsel per cart's worth. Volume, not weight. The emaciation of the workers made sense now. They were working for food, obvious enough, and being paid in amounts too small. She shuddered to think that the sleeping figures along the far wall may have not been alive at all, and her fears were confirmed when one of the more starved people fell to the ground and was hastily brought to the pile by a worrying automaton to be thrown atop. Another automaton thrust an old pickaxe into Ashley's hands and shoved her to one of the walls. That seemed to be its sole purpose, and a word away from her, it did not move further once back to its position. The girl thought to resist, but hunger pangs were beginning, and she did not see another way to get food. So she set about copying the motions of the other workers and chipping away at the walls. She found that several given swings would produce a powdery material which varied in color from the light rock walls, and this material was gathered up as best as any worker could do to pour into a bucket residing next to each other. The full buckets were dumped into the carts set up on the track, which ran into a crude homemade tunnel of which it was too dark to see the end. At some point, noon came, or something like it. The second sun came to make the land even brighter, and though the ground above seemed lifeless and quiet, but for the vesprules and the bareness, Ashley could see that this land was bustling with much smaller life. The walking fungi could be found skittering here and there, looking for bodies to eat, while some insectae were crawling about too. A few curious ones with large wings and grossly thin bodies stayed near one of the automatons, drinking up any presently leaking oil and feeding on rust. There was plenty of flora, if only grass and weeds, but a dull flower could be found occasionally, gray from the baking of the first sun. It may have been attributed to her frustration at the day's events in general, or to a less than lengthy attention span combined with a large curiosity, or a whim that claimed survival instinct when it was apparent that the work would not produce food quickly enough to satisfy. In any case, Ashley abruptly took hold of the most recent pickaxe she had acquired and ran to the nearest automaton, the one guarding the cart, and proceeded to smash it to bits. This was the hastily conjured plot, and it all but failed when the tool was dashed to pieces in her hands against the metal of the automaton's body. However, it did not retaliate, but bafflingly handed her a new pickaxe and pushed her in the direction of a wall as it did before. The workers paid absolutely no attention to this scene and continued to work. This startled the girl. "At what point have your lives become so hopeless that you've given up?" she yelled, her work ethic equally dashed to pieces. "At what point has no one thought to fight this?" No one responded, but all continued to work in their collective daze. Ashley decided this was not going to work for her, and took the new pickaxe to run into the mines. The issue of hunger would have to wait. The goal was to escape. Certain death waited for all in this open grave, and she would have none of it. Not yet. Watching her disappear into the closest cave was only a dense cluster of fungus, the caps turning her way. Something under the ground shifted beneath them, as if trying to watch as well. Something about the overall scene in the canyons and caves down below the castle grounds had become very apparent, and that was the level of fungus. Most of the mushroom life was wide-capped here, sticky and purple with fuchsia blotches. They were varying sizes and always in groups of 20 or better. In the cave, Ashley could see by some light coming from the entrance, and lanterns had been set along the path the minecart track took. It was this path she followed, her pickaxe stuck to webbing at her side. Her dress was holding up well, but it had become discolored with dirt and dust, apart from the fungus stain which no longer smelled. She passed many carts on the way, always filled to the brim with the bluish or purple dust, sometimes green, that the workers outside were excavating uselessly. A voice presently startled her.
"Hominid," it said. "We call you Hum."
It was from behind. Ashley whirled to see nothing but the quiet mine carts and lanterns.
"We eat hums. You are food for Parak. Always have been."
The voice was behind her again. She turned, nails out and ready to strike. But there was nothing again.
"We like make homes and heads."
It said again, behind. She whirled. Nothing.
"Heads really hard to get to. Have to use back most of time. Tails and legs and arms not good. Fingers and toes okay, but no room."
She leapt back, claws out, and made her way deeper into the mine.
"No room for what?"
"Spores,"
said the voice.
"the children. Me tomorrow, and them tomorrow. No room. Head is best."
Ashley felt a slight prick in the back of her neck and realized the thing had been planted on her the entire time. She reached back easily enough to clutch it by the cap, tear it away from her dress, and chuck it forcefully into the ground in front of her.
"Head is best,"
it shrieked and threw itself at her again. It was nothing sort of creepy to the poor girl, whose heart was beating rapidly, but she grabbed the thing in midair and in mid-jump and tearing out a piece of her spiderweb dress, fastened its legs and mouth. She was sure she had, but only because she practically wrapped the thing up completely and stuck it to her arm.
Shut up, she said. Perhaps I'll take a bite of your head, and you can see how that feels.
The mushroom nodded vigorously, but then stopped and shook its head. It was going crazy at the thought of being eaten.
Now that the shoe is on the other, leg, what in the three hells are you again? I thought mushrooms didn't talk or eat people.
The creature wriggled furiously. Ashley took the webbing off of its mouth.
Stupid harm! Self only speak with mouth. Self cannot speak with web on mouth. Ashley does not care, said Ashley. Self isn't going to talk at all unless you answer everything I ask and tell me exactly what I want to know.
Ashley gripped the fungus, letting her claws dig into it, and hoped it would take her seriously. She wasn't altogether sure that she could eat it, much as the cap looked edible, but she certainly didn't want it crawling all over her and attempting to eat her again.
Head is best. Other self love spores and head,
It said again, and Ashley resisted the temptation to smash it into the rocks.
Do you eat the people that are imprisoned here?
She asked.
If dead only. Self head only, head best if dead. Fingers too small for anything. What about the man above? Who is he?
But the creature somehow darted back into the cap as though it was shelled reptilier, and it hardened up.
Hey, wake up.
This and the light rapping against the cap were to no avail, so she tapped the creature against the rock. Although it scratched the surface of the cap, the creature did not respond at all, and Ashley wondered whether it was dead.
Stupid harm,
It said and jerked free, rolling as it landed and again skittered off into the dark, entirely too fast for Ashley to get. Don't die, she thought to herself. Don't die or those things will make you their home. The passage was lit not by torches, but by different mushrooms that emitted light, and these grew sporadically on the wall, the ceilings and the floors. They were in small clusters, and the placement didn't make sense until the girl got close and realized that they were dead. Ashley was only understanding the cusp of her situation as she happened upon camp after camp of this skittering, poor-spoken parachnike, and at more than one point her only option, rather than being overtaken and chewed on, and really her dress was in a shameful state as it was to bounce upon their heads as stepping stones. This did no damage to the creatures as they opted to harden under her feet, their only other choice to be smashed against the rock floor. It was quickly second nature for her to avoid them altogether, and swiftly smash away any that might presumptuously leap at her. Ashley remembered the words of the first one she had come into contact with outside. Maybe cave ones would love your meatless limbs. Shit, she remarked. Time to leave the cave. At some point, the girl heeded a natural light rather than any dead fungus and raced towards it. The way she came out wasn't the way she had gone in. But this was a good thing. Instead of corpses piling up in front of automatons forcing workers to slave away mundanely, Ashley was met with something of a barren vine orchard, the wall-clinging tendrils bearing assorted low-hanging fruit. While sort of an odd thing to come across in a ravine floor, Ashley guessed the fruit would not have interested a fungus. She set to work grabbing whatever she could, biting straight away into several and finding that some needed peeling. Presently, she tested herself of her knowledge, quizzically identifying the fruits as she studied the differently sized and colored vines and taking what she could reach. The larger green berries were pearlies, the hard orange bulbs were applias, and the skinny rinds would have held widow fruit, so named for the said rinds that were fatal if ingested. Something had been here already, probably an automaton, to pick all of those. Somehow, she knew the widow fruit was supposed to make fantastic wine, if inoculated correctly, and she prided herself in realizing she may have tasted such wine in the Mad's castle above. The canyon walls were still steep here, but they were not uniform. Ashley wondered what the ground above looked like. The first sun was still out, and the light hurt her eyes from being in the dark for such a time. She went on to decide that the pea drafts tasted best, but they were a little overripe, and her least favorite of all were the tomatoes, which were golden in this kind of grand cycle, certainly healthiest of the fruits, but the hardest to get to, growing in the thinner tendrils that yielded very few footholds after a steep rise. The sound of crumbling and then a smash resounding behind caused Ashley to spin. The entrance to the mine from which she had just come had collapsed into rubble. The stones would probably be impossible to move out of the way without incurring another incident. She was stuck in the orchard, decidedly more for the better than the worse. A shadow darted over the land she had crossed, and she glanced upwards but saw nothing. The ground shook after the shadow disappeared, and Ashley decided it was best to run through the orchard in hopes of an exit. "Every movement I make is forced by another," she exclaimed as she started off, wishing to have the mushroom back if only to speak to. The shadow moved across the orchard ground just in front of her, but its origin disappeared, with a rumble again, before she could trace it above. So she picked up her pace. She had rested to a point before coming here, and she had eaten herself full, but it was a test to keep up the run without doubling over and giving out for the day. She was very frustrated at having to leave the safest place she had seen yet. There was the shadow again, quite a ways ahead of her. It was a creature of some sort, bounding along the top of the gorge walls, and it was easy to see that it was toying with her, trying to get her much further ahead. For what? So it could chase her back? There wasn't any time to wonder before she heard a booming voice from above, fantastic and regal, full of gusto, and it boasted the following all while she ran. "Thee, bounding along, tip of thine tail, halt, shout glory, glory to your king. 56 battles and 4 wars I have fought, and victorious in all but the dive. Recognize the crown, and offer your life to your majesty." This is said in various ways, altering the speech as the chase went on until Ashley could see the exit in a tunnel that presumably rejoined the network that she had left earlier, and was nearly upon it. Until then, it went on booming in those regal tones, demanding recognition of its status, and when Ashley was upon the tunnel, a great beast came crashing down from the edge of the canyon above, and landed on its feet, between her and escape. "Thee, bounding along on the tip of thine tail, seek your life with thimbles, seek it with care," said the booming regal voice, and the source was from the great monster that was now upon the girl. This beast was unfathomable to her. The description of beast was very fitting, but this was too challenging to narrow down further, for the form took on beings that were unbeknownst to her, yet similar in ways to things she knew. It was very large, with much for claws, teeth, and horns, and it was covered in thick fur. It could have been feline, but it was not familiar nor consistently short of hair. It could have been lupine, but it was not a vesperwolf. Despite her curious knowledge of animals presented until now, the girl was not able to recall this one, and felt genuinely afraid, especially since this particular creature was about 20 times her size, and actively pursuing her as prey. "How could anything like you exist?" she questioned, thinking then the same thing of the arachnine creature she wished she had only dreamt about. 56 battles and 4 wars I have fought, and victorious in all but the dive," boomed the creature. "A beast of war, then," she said, trying to distract. "You're a hero." "Shout glory to your king," it boomed, and this caused a rustle behind the girl. Further down the ravine, several antelopes were grazing on the vines along the wall, but they had taken notice of the creature chasing each other their way, and their ears were perked up as they watched the two, ready to go bounding down. A few birds flew off from their hunting in the same spot. The beast was ready to pounce upon Ashley again, but it raised its head, snorted at the antelopes, and bounded over the girl to chase them instead. She watched it go, frozen for just a second at its footfall. She realized it must have been hungry for more than what her petite frame could have offered. The antelopes were easily twice her height and much healthier looking. The predator overtook one of them and let out a cry before tearing into its gullet. She felt horrible for the poor victim, but saw that the ravine in that direction forked just past where the animals were grazing, one path looking more of the same, and the other bearing water of indeterminable depth. She took a few breaths, feeling her heart pound from nearly being an appetizer, and began running as light-footed as possible behind the beast to race to the water. She knew she could swim. She was not sure for how long or how long would be required until she would finally be safe, but she was determined. If the antilopus were thought to be a malicious animal, and spiteful but with a sense of humor, as some animalae were in these lands, they would have furiously roared in mirth at Ashley's discovery that the bit of water she thought continued beyond her previous field of vision was a dead end, somewhat fed in part by a pitiful stream coming from above, the same above from which the predator was able to effortlessly leap. Her determination was cut short. She cursed herself and everything. The girl wheeled around to find the beast still busy ripping apart the animal it had caught. At least it had stopped its nonsensical boasting, she thought, and zipped over to the other end of the fork. She saw the ravine path ended at a cave where the other animals had exited. Ashley looked once more at the way she came, and realized that the vines upon which the antilopus were grazing did not originate at the ravine floor. Rather, they had dropped from over the edge of the top of the walls, some dozens of meters above, and they looked very climbable now. The girl thought it was best to escape to the above rather than risk a dead end in the cave that might contain more of the same, as well as avoid those stupid funguses. She swallowed and ran by the beast once more, leaping with all the strength she had in her feeble legs as bones were swallowed with flesh just a meter away. She was barely able to grasp at the vine and keep hold. Such was her current terror. But she quickly found the strength and focus needed when she heard the booming regal voice below, as the thing had finished with the edible parts of the smaller beast. "Thee, your glorious king commends thee. As thy bound along tip of thine tail, fool, bow your head to the floor 30 times 3, return mine. Bow your head to the king, return from war." She dared not look below as she raced up, quickly exhausted. She knew it would only figure that the beast would be able to climb the vertical wall even without a single damned foothold to assist. "Your king, the Bandersnatch, awaits your servitude, foolish whelp." So she had figured, and it was doing just that. The ravine wall, which shook as the monster found footing by striking it directly as it climbed after her, ended at some 20 bodies in height, and the edge looked easy enough to overcome. While the girl did not know what lay above, she knew a chance encounter with the Vesperwolves or the Baroness existed, and now she knew what she would be fighting to avoid if she resisted them. I can handle that, she thought. I can fight this to the death, because it's clear that I'll die if I stay down here. On cue, none other than the Baroness appeared at the edge of the wall, and she grinned down at the two climbing as she produced a sword and began hacking at the vine that Ashley was climbing. "No, no name, you will stay, and you will die," she seethed, "as will that monstrosity. You went and forgot your manners, and now you won't be any use to anybody." Ashley realized she was more than midway up the wall, and the beast was but 3 bodies below her. She had come into this world falling. Was she going to leave it that way as well? And that, my friends, was the end of chapter 1. Now, these are going to be a long haul per. This book is a fairly long book, and I believe it goes up to 12, maybe 13 chapters. Our author put a lot of thought and detail into everything, to go into every bit of piece and to give it that Wonderland-esque feel, something that is but isn't, something that's up but down, something that's but around, things that, like, I think it's really just to pull our imagination, our thoughts out, while we think it may just be something that's like, hey, this is the way it is. We see things face value and we say, this is that and that's the way it is. I think he is trying to say, like, everything isn't as it is. Everything has something, but everything isn't as it is. At the same time, you kind of like are questioning everything. Everything is something different than what you may think it is, and then even more so. And just as much, I still struggle to read sometimes, even when I've read a book I've learned. So I can only imagine going back to other books I've read now and going back through and being like, yep, I still got tripped up by this word, or like, anything like that. I'm just amazed I was able to make it through there. I had a little bit of water on the side. I think I only had to maybe give like a little relief cough to my throat once or something like that, but it actually made a lot more sense to me because I used to make these in like to 3, even 4 parts together, as they were like about 20 minutes per part. But like this brought honestly a whole new perspective to what I was reading, because I didn't have that chance to break and think each of these were separate pieces of storyline. This is all one storyline under one chapter. This is Alice's just entrance into the world that she's already been a part of that she doesn't remember, but into the Mad's castle, into the Mad's mines, and just safety from the Bandersnatch, just to almost potentially die now to the Baroness once again. Y'all, make sure to stay beautiful, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next chapter.